After that very modest introduction, I'm here to declare that I'm going to re-enter public life very shortly. I haven't decided on the party yet, but that will come into being. There's a fellow here, Buzz Hargrove. Some of you may know him. Some of you may wish you didn't know him. I happen to know him. Where are you, Buzz?
He's a New Brunswicker.
Of course he's a New Brunswicker. He also, some 2 years ago, they had a great dinner honoring his contributions. Bob White and I were chairing the MCs for the evening. Buzz stood up and said, we're going to start our own political party. He had my hand up, and he said, you can be leader. Just think what it would have been like if I'd been leader with Buzz Hargrove of a new political party in Ontario. We would be sweeping the polls today. Now, I have had so many suggestions, particularly from our chairman from New Brunswick, as to the need to be brief. I cannot clear my throat in the 5 minutes allocated. And why should I start tonight? I'm probably older than anyone else here, and that gives me certain rights. And if any of you dare start to heckle after 10 minutes, no, I won't do anything because I won't be here for 10 minutes. I want to first of all say how impressed I was with that video and the very kind things said. It reminds me a little bit of Gerald Ford when he was being honored and he said something about God should forgive those who exaggerated my contributions. And then he went on to say, I should ask God to forgive me for enjoying it so much. I want to say a word about the president of this organization. He's a very shy, retiring individual down there somewhere. I read his curriculum vitae. He's been at 3 universities, failed at all of them, but decided this would be a great opportunity for him. David, that's not true. You made a great contribution. Now, why did you recognize McMaster? There are other universities here. There are other colleges here. Why did you do that, Mr. Chairman? You don't know. I have to tell you, McMaster used to be a Baptist university. I nearly went there on a SILAC scholarship, which had nothing to do with academic achievements, because I played the football. Now, I want to get around. I want to say a word or two about 1 or 2 other people, if my glasses will work. First of all, I apologize to those of you from our sister province of Quebec, for which province I've always had a great affection and understanding. I recall so well, I went down to the first referendum at the request of the Montreal Chamber of Commerce. I made a speech. My French was better than Diefenbaker's, which doesn't mean much. Listen, he won't care what's on television. I don't think he ever cared what was on television. But Randy Levesque called me the next day. It'll come as a shock to you that Mr. Levesque and I actually were friends. We got along very well. We disagreed totally on the one issue. But he called me and said, Bill, I hear you were in Montreal last night and you made a great speech. Will you please come again soon? We went up 2 points in the polls last night. Now, he could have been serious for all I know. I think I'm glad to be here. I heard some of the discussions early about the boomer generation. I don't know what generation I am. I mean, I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be anywhere at age 61, 81, 82, who knows what. So you just have to tolerate my idiosyncrasies. I also am delighted to have met so many of you who I knew when you were children. But I want to introduce somebody who deserves so much credit, not credit. We don't deal with credits in the days I was in public life, but made such a great contribution. Mr. Chairman, it's the only mistake you've made all night. You didn't introduce the very distinguished Senator Hugh Siegel, who was with me for a number of years and made such a great contribution. I have to say a word or two about Monique. Monique, I have to say to you that we're all the beneficiaries of your excellent knowledge and the way you've conducted the capital affairs of your province. It really made me feel on occasion that any transfer equalization payments would become totally unnecessary, and so I thank you for the contribution you've made. I look at Gordon Nixon here. He went to Queen's. We all make mistakes. I have to hasten to say I'm an honorary graduate from Queen's, and Gordon, if you think being an honorary graduate doesn't mean you had done a lot of work, you'd be totally wrong. Anyway, he didn't play for their football team, but he was a rugby player. For those of you who follow the sport of rugby, you know it takes a lot of people who are totally insensitive to legalized mayhem. He didn't wear a helmet. He probably had several concussions, but in spite of that, he has prospered, become a great philanthropist, a great leader of the institution that he heads. And Gordon, it's a pleasure to be on the same, shall we say, circuit as yourself tonight, even though I'm not sure of how you vote. Now, I have to say a word or two about my friend from the CAW. I mean, Bob Ray was on there, and I have to tell you that Bob Ray and our friends. You may find that difficult to understand, but if you know him as I do, it wouldn't be difficult. I remember being introduced by the Federation of Labor president some years ago at a dinner for the retiring deputy minister. And I was introduced by Mr. Wilson as the last socialist premier Ontario's ever had. I know some of you from the corporate world will say we knew it all along, but I try to operate in a very balanced way. I have to say that the reason I'm interested in the young man from the CAW is because of the very relevant role the CAW plays in one of the most important industries in this province. When I was premier, I think we calculated roughly that the auto sector was really 24% of the gross provincial product. I don't know what it is today, it may not be that high, but it is still relevant. I recall vividly being told you can't do this when we made a grant to the Ford Motor Company for their Essex engine plant, $500 million. I remember accosting Mr. Trudeau at the Cattlemen's Club in Calgary. He told Jack Horner, get over there, Jack, I don't want you here part of the conversation. And so we decided what we would do. Mr. Trudeau gave me a figure. I said to him, sir, I happen to know that your Treasury Board approved something greater than that. He said, how did you find out? I said, sir, I can't tell you. And he said, I will go to that figure. So we shook hands, and that's how the Essex engine plant came into being, employed 2,000 people, $500 million. We paid $28 million. Do the mathematics. Half of it was building materials and equipment. We got our 5% on that. We got the income tax on the 2,000 employees. And it was delightful for me to see what has happened by governments recently in the recognition of the validity and the importance of the auto sector, the economy of this province. And I say, and I hate to acknowledge anybody of a different political philosophy, but Ed Lumley's here, a very fine minister. He was known in the Trudeau government as the real Tory within the Trudeau government. And he was so helpful in what we did for the auto sector. I have to say a word or two about the young man from Regina. I'll be very brief. I try to sell you a card in a certain political party. You should take my advice. You have a future in politics, but just make sure it's the right party, and I will continue to recommend the right one to you. I was thoroughly impressed, and I enjoyed it. The other thing I say to you, you're a great example of Regina as it is portrayed when the CFL is playing out there. It's exciting for me, and I just, see, I'm an economic and cultural nationalist. I'm opposed to the NFL. I love their game, except I can never understand, you know, when the guy puts up his hand like this for a fair catch. I first said to Mr. Robbie, who was head of the Miami Dolphins, does that man have to leave the room? It looks like school. Anyway. No, I'm teasing. I think the CFL is a great cultural institution, and so, young man from Regina, make sure it continues. I could go through a list of other things here. I'm delighted that my friend from the Globe and Mail wasn't writing when I was the premier. I tell you, I listened to you. You were so articulate. I didn't understand anything you were saying, but you were very impressive. I have to say to you, see, I was there when John Robarts said, we were up to 4 o'clock in the morning, I won't tell you doing what, when we went the next morning and Mr. Pearson put the Medicare, or whatever it was, program on the table. Mr. Robarts said, it's the most Machiavellian scheme in the history of federal-provincial relations, and reluctantly, Mr. Prime Minister, the money's so good we have to take it. Now, for those of you filming this for posterity, it wasn't quite that way, but it was close. But I do want to also say thank you to you, David, and to this organization for the recognition you have given to Jim Fleck, for instance, who was with me in government, Dr. Ed Stewart, who in my view was one of the very great public servants in the history of this province, and to Bob Carman, who was also with the public service. I have to say something serious here, I guess. I liked the video. It was a bit too kind. I remember the National Film Board a few years ago did something on the government that I was then privileged to lead. We preferred ideas to ideology. We built a large tent, and we let fairness, enterprise, and compassion be those things that guided us. Some people say to me, you weren't either left-wing or right-wing, and I said, if that's the case, most Ontarians are in the middle, so I feel very comfortable. It was important to me that we understood that while we had an obligation to ensure that the economy was maturing, that our people were employed, we also had a very real obligation to understand that we had to help those people less fortunate and who could not help themselves. That, to me, was fundamental. David, are you looking at your watch? Am I still all right? Do I have a minute or two left? No? Oh, that's too bad, but I'm going to take it anyway. I have to say this, and I'm being serious now for a moment or two. I refer to what I think, and I listen to our chairperson speak about what can happen in this country. And I say to you, the critic on health issues, I used to make speeches where I said, show me a good lawyer, and I'll show you a good kindergarten teacher. And then a lot of people said there aren't any good lawyers. So I changed it, show me a good doctor. I have to say this, and I've been involved in it for so many years, and I spent 9 years of my life with respect to the educational system in this province. I recall going through a bitter debate as it related to the consolidation of our school boards. Most of you aren't from rural Ontario. I can tell you it was traumatic. I recall the last reading in the House. Bob Nixon had the time of his life criticizing me. Those were the days when members thumped the desks. I thought the whole House was going to collapse. I got up and I said, Mr. Speaker, I listened very attentively. I have in front of me a piece of very glossy paper. It's in black, red, and white. In it says, if you elect us, we will have county school boards and regional government. Mr. Speaker, I said, this was the platform of the Liberal Party of Ontario in the most recent election. We have taken their ideas, implemented them, sat down. Our side of the House exploded. Bob Nixon didn't have a word to say. So I say to those of you interested in politics, don't worry about your policies. If you can steal a good one from the other side, do it. Just don't let them know when it's happening. But we had fun. And I want to make this point. I listen to those young people. I still visit with young people. I mean, we have 12 grandchildren. I can't avoid it. But the thing they say to me is we're a bit cynical about public life. We're a bit cynical about politicians. And I think I can say with some measure of confidence that when I was involved in the political process, we could fight with the Bob Rays, the Stephen Lewises, the Bob Nixons, the Elmer Sofas. We could go out and break bread together. It was never personal. It was on issues. And that degree of civility isn't there for us today, and it's something I think we miss. And I respect those who are endeavoring to bring back civility to public life. But I get back to the views on education, and I say very simply, the future of this country can relate to our corporate world, it can relate to our resource sector, but without the advances in support in education, none of that will come into being. I'm one of those who has some sense of what's happening in other jurisdictions. I know the progress we've made here, but I say very simply two issues. No young person should be precluded from a college or university education because they didn't have the economic means to be there. We owe them that much. I will also say, and I say this to the federal public service who are here, I know that education is historically and properly a matter for the provincial jurisdiction. I can also tell you, and I speak now not just because I went there at the University of Toronto, it is no longer a provincial institution. It is a national institution, and this is true of our universities across this country. It is time we understood that they represent for us the real key to the future that our very fine chair lady mentioned. Without that, we're nowhere. And so I say to the Government of Canada officials who are here, I know the Constitution, but I also know you have on occasion understood that support of post-secondary education is so fundamental, you'll find ways to do it. In fact, you already have. I make one final observation. There's a Perimeter Institute now in development in Waterloo. It's the kind of institution that will, in my view, become global in nature, respected by other jurisdictions, and which holds a great promise for us. One thing I will conclude on, and Mr. Chairman, you can come up and tug at me any minute now, but I'm nearly finished. I mean, I'm enjoying myself. I don't know whether you people are, and I don't care. I mean, you don't know how, shall we say, relieved I am. I don't care how any of you vote. I'm not running for anything. I have one final observation. Huey made some reference to my involvement in the discussion or debate over the entrenchment and the patriation of our Constitution. Some few months ago, I went to have dinner with Roy McMurtry. The other Roy from Saskatchewan was there. The gentleman who always took great pride in coming from rural Quebec, although he lived in urban Quebec. I said to the three of them, you gentlemen have traveled the world. You've all written books. You've all made speeches. When I write my book, you'll understand one thing. You did nothing but carry papers for the first ministers. There was no kitchen cabinet. There was never a kitchen. And I was teasing them. And our friend Jean said to me, you know, Bill, I don't know to this day who made that phone call rather late at night to the Prime Minister of our country, which totally altered his state of mind and why the next morning things were so successful. I said, John, who do you think? The eyes lit up. He said, I guess it was you. I'm a very modest person, but Huey was there, and it was probably one of the more significant phone calls I made as your first Minister of the province of Ontario. Something else I share with you, and I finalize these observations. I can be a bit emotional about this country. As the Premier of this province, I endeavored to represent you in a way I thought was fair and equitable. But the point I always made, and Huey was very supportive of this, that my responsibility was to the people of Ontario. I always felt I was a Canadian first. Thank you very much.